I'm really excited for our evening. The idea of the evening was to really organize an evening that appreciate the work of human rights lawyers, because their work in many cases is like a Sisyphic work. They try to fight the injustice and work hard, and in many cases in our reality, the court decide they don't accept the appeal, or and still they continue in doing this work for many years. Like Michael Sfard, who came here in the age of 22, and today is one of the prominent human rights lawyer in Israel. And we have two precious guests. I met Babloo in a forum of 35 peace builders that meet in Berlin once a year, and people come from all area of conflict, and we are meeting and discussing, exchanging methods, discussing the problems and dilemmas, and people come from Middle East, from Africa, from Asia, from South America, from all over, wherever there is a conflict. From Mali to Manipur. And I heard about his Babloo's work in Manipur, and I was very impressed, and I decided to invite him to share his experience here. And I invited Gabi Lasky to respond, because she is one of the prominent human rights lawyers in Israel, and we can find common things and different things in the struggle for freedom, for human rights, for justice in both societies. And I hope you will enjoy. And Alon is with us. He just finished our course for young lawyers, and he will share also his experience in the work. And Muhammad Abu Sneina, who is a human rights lawyer and a facilitator at the School for Peace. And I hope we have a good discussion. So, Babloo, you start.
Okay, so we sit here and do it?
You can stand, sit, whatever.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much, first of all, to Nava for this wonderful opportunity to be able to visit Israel. And the first day we went to Jerusalem. The second day we went to Tel Aviv. And today we had a tour around Neve Shalom, and slowly I'm trying to sink in to understand the enterprise and the courage to be able to stand and build peace in the middle of perhaps the world's most intractable conflict, and to be able to hope and respond to this is where I draw my inspiration and recharge my battery to continue the work that we do in Manipur. Let me first introduce my part of the world that I come from. It's not the best known part of the world, so I will take the help of a little PowerPoint presentation that I have made. Can I go to the first slide?
The light, little.
Yeah, we took it. Yeah. Well, Manipur is in the easternmost corner of India. You see on your right-hand side, close to Myanmar, and up in the north is China. So that is not the most well-known part of India. And in any international meeting, when I ask people to guess which country I come from, nobody ever guessed me to be from India. So it's ethnically quite different from the rest of the country. And up until the British came, this is not a region that was touched by any of the empires that had ruled India. Yeah, maybe we can go to the next slide. A little bit of a history about the context in which I work. Manipur was also a very ancient kingdom. We believe that there was an unbroken dynasty that ruled this place from the 33 AD onwards. So this is the state symbol of Manipur, which was bombed during the Second World War. Manipur was also the place where the last battle in Asia was fought. It was the westernmost point that the Japanese were able to reach, and from then on, the Allied pushed back. So this is a reconstruction of our ancient palace compound. We came under the British rule in 1891, and we were granted independence in 1947 when the British left. And we had our own constitution and elected government in 1948. It was a kind of a constitutional monarchy. But it was only in 1949 that our king was forced to sign a merger agreement with India, and we were declared as a part of the Dominion of India. Again, this story, even most of the Indians also do not really read about this story, but this is a part of our history. And there was also some response, not very strong initially, but people felt that it was a kind of an annexation, and therefore the demand for self-determination was there, which became much more stronger in the 60s. But in response to that, the government of India have put a law in this place called the Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958. This law initially was used against the Indians by the British in 1942 when India started its Quit India resolution, when Mahatma Gandhi and Nehru said the British should leave India. But the same law was applied again only for the Northeast. It was in 1958, it was meant for Assam and Manipur. So we go to the text of the law, because that's where the legal immunity is provided under the law. It's basically a law which allows the military to go and operate in this area and do what would be normally the domain of a police. So they can go and search somebody's house without warrant. They can arrest someone without warrant, and they can use force to the extent of causing death. And that's a very strong word. If the person is suspected to be disturbing public order. So in any other part of the country, if someone disturbs public order, the maximum punishment that can be given on this person is 6 months of imprisonment. But if it is in Manipur and in Assam, from 1958 onwards, it can be summary execution. And there can be no legal recourse to it unless and until there is a sanction from the central government, not from the state government, but from the central authority. And this is a very problematic issue. And a similar law has been applied in Jammu and Kashmir only in 1990, even though the whole world look at Kashmir as the boiling point of South Asia. Many of its legal framework was repressive legal laws have been used in this eastern corner, like Manipur and Assam, and Nagaland and small states in this for a much longer period of time. So can we go to the next slide? Yeah, oh, sorry, this was an explanation of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Can we go to the next? Yeah, so the self-determination movement also become armed, and from the mid-60s onwards, there has been a self-determination movement, and there has been a series of military operations to contain these armed groups who finds refuge in the jungles, thick jungles in Upper Burma, where there's quite, because of the hilly terrain in this area, it's quite ideal for guerrilla movements to take place. And as a result of this military operation, a series of human rights violation has been there for a very long period of time. So these are some of the military operations that I was, more recent ones, but maybe next slide, please. Interestingly, there was also a non-violent response to this kind of military operations. When there is a military operation, the armed groups are the main target, but inevitably civilian populations are also targeted. So it's very difficult to distinguish who are the militants, who are the civilians. And as a result of which, there is a lot of human rights violations in the form of disappearances, torture, rape, extrajudicial execution. And one of the response was a very unique response that this lady up in the slide, her name is Irom Sharmila, and she was actually someone whom we worked with. And the constitutionality of this Armed Forces Special Powers Act was challenged in the Supreme Court of India as early as 1980. That was a time when India started its new procedure called the public interest litigation. Earlier, when the British, we inherited most of the legal system from the British, there was a principle of locus standi. Unless and until you are a person who is affected by the issue that you are raising, you cannot go to the court. But in 1980, this locus standi principle was removed when it comes to violation of fundamental rights of the citizen. Because India is a huge country, most of them are very poor, and most of the people do not really have the capacity to go to the court. So they introduced this procedure called the public interest litigation, where they said if it is a violation of fundamental right, which is pretty much what the Constitution recognized and the most fundamental human rights, then whether you are affected or not, a pro bono publico, as a public interested person, you can go to the court and the court will take it seriously. So when this principle was introduced in the form of public interest litigation, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act was challenged in the Supreme Court, saying that this violates the most fundamental of human rights, namely the right to life of a citizen. The Constitution clearly provides that right to life and personal liberty should be protected by the law. It can be removed only by due process of law. And to say that a soldier in the street with a gun and his suspicion that you are disturbing public order cannot be a procedure established by law. But unfortunately, despite of such a clear, brazen violation of the most fundamental human rights, in 1997, the Supreme Court of India actually upheld the constitutionality of Armed Forces Special Powers Act. And this was very unfortunate, and people were not happy. So we did something called Independent People's Commission of Inquiry. The Supreme Court took a very conservative approach, and they have basically said that, looked at whether the parliament has the competence to pass such a law. And of course, considering all national security and other issues, they said it's perfectly legitimate to pass a law like this. But we, as affected population, give a lot of cases to the Supreme Court that this is the actual effect of this law on the population for so many years. But the Supreme Court just ignored this point and was looking purely in a very conservative fashion. So we were very disappointed, and we invited a very respected judge from Bombay. if it is someone from Manipur or from Northeast India or from Kashmir who are affected population, we could be called as being biased. So we invited a judge from Mumbai and asked him to do a survey. We took him to the family who's a torture victim, who's the military have put a stick into his anus and destroyed his entire intestine, and he was actually having a surgery, and his intestine was still dangling when Justice Hosbet Suresh from Mumbai came and look at the situation. We took him to families of the disappeared. We took him to a lady who was raped by the military in front of her father-in-law. I mean, raping is bad enough, but to do that, it destroys the very fabric of the sanctity of a family. So Justice Suresh, at the end of that committee, kind of commission, the People's Commission, it's not an official commission, said that irrespective of what the Supreme Court say, a sanction to kill can never be constitutional. And it's a very strong statement to come from a judge defying the judgment of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically said that, the military have do's and don'ts which are issued by the military headquarters. So it's okay because there are guidelines that are issued by the military authority to how to operate in this area. And Justice Suresh said that these so-called do's and don'ts, on the basis of which the Supreme Court upheld this law, are followed more in breached than in compliance. In reality, the do's have become don'ts and the don'ts have become do's. The problem is there is no mechanism in which we can make a complaint and say this is what needs to, the mistakes are committed. So it's a bit of a right which doesn't have a remedy. So when it is violated, if you don't have a place to actually go and complain, it was not at all effective. Right after we finished this investigation and we submitted this report to the Government of India, the Union Home Ministry, which looks after internal security. We submitted this whole report for their kind comments because this is the reality that the judge have seen. Exactly 1 week after that, again, there was a massacre in Manipur, in a small village called Malom, where 10 civilians were killed because there was when the military convoy was going, there was a bomb blast, and the military just got down, and in a bus stand, there was a group of people, including a 63-year-old woman, 2 brothers, waiting to go for a private tuition for studies, and all 10 of them were killed. And one of our volunteers, who was part of this People's Commission of Inquiry, was Irom Sharmila, the lady who is up in the photo, and she decided that enough is enough. I am not going to take food unless and until Armed Forces Special Powers Act is removed from Manipur. And she continued this hunger strike for the next 15 years. She started on November 2000. 2nd of November was when this massacre took place. 3rd and 4th, the government declared curfew, so nobody can get out of their home. On the 5th, she came to us and said, "Brother, I'm going to go for a hunger strike." I mean, she's 2 years junior to us, until this law is removed. So on the 5th, she made a public, she went and sat at the place where the massacre took place. And the next day itself, she was arrested on attempt to commit suicide. The government said she's attempting to commit suicide. And she was put in that position. And then on the 21st of November, the doctor said that she's not going to last the next day if she continues with this. So we also have a Manipur Human Rights Commission at that time. And the Manipur Human Rights Commission told the hospital where she was put, even though it's a jurisdictionally a part of the prison, she said she's not going to last for one more day, and she was basically kept in a. She was the Human Rights Commission said that it is the responsibility of the hospital to keep her alive. So the negotiation was that a nasal tube will be put into her nose, and they will pour nutrients. So she also accepted that because she realized that it's not a decision that will be taken so soon. And she was put in that position for the next 15 years. Interestingly though, the maximum punishment again for someone to attempt to commit suicide is 1 year of imprisonment. She was never convicted, but she was put and in that position. So every 1 year later, she's released. She continued the protest, and she's again rearrested. So it's a big of a thing. But after she completed 15 years in 2016, nothing was moving, so she got pretty frustrated, left it, and now she's happily married and is mother of 2 children and live quite away from all the crowd. But the other story that we would like to share you is the next slide. Can we go to the next slide? So our organization, Human Rights Alert, have been documenting cases as human rights activists whenever there is a case where we think this is an extrajudicial execution. And it's a small place and a very strong community sense in Manipur. So everybody knows who is an armed militant fighting for the political cause, whatever, good, bad, ugly. And people also know who are just ordinary people doing ordinary things in life. And whenever people who are part of the community who is not necessarily going into the jungle and taking up guns against the state are killed, there is always very strong community reaction. And these cases, we also go follow up and document these cases. So for almost 20 years, we have been doing this, document cases. And in India, again, there is, at least in the normative level, there are a lot of institutions, there are a lot of law courts. So we try to use as much as possible. But increasingly, we are also realizing that when it comes to the military and the counterinsurgency police, we are not able to go much. So we have been documenting. And in 2009, we organized the families of these victims because we realized that we are not heading anywhere. The institutions are not responding. And so we are taking the model from the Latin American stories of how Plaza de Mayo, the mothers of the disappeared, came together and moved things. So we also try and organize the victims, and we were able to form an organization, can we go to the next, called Extrajudicial Execution Victim Families Association. And we were in touch with hundreds and thousands of these families, and we came together. And in 2012, can we go to the next? Again, India, as a democratic country, have invited, in the UN Human Rights Council, they have these special procedures where there are experts who are looking at specific thematic issues of human rights. And India has made an open invitation for any of these UN experts to come and visit India and study the phenomena of human rights violation and engage to bring about positive change in India. So in 2011, India made an open invitation to all these procedures, and the first special rapporteur, they call them the special rapporteur, to visit India was the special rapporteur on extrajudicial summary or arbitrary execution. At that time, it was a professor from South Africa called Professor Christoph Heinz, and when he came to India, we invited him to come to Manipur. Unfortunately, there was a lot of pressure on him not to make that visit. So he came up to Assam, which is pretty close to Manipur, and some 70 of our families came together and met him. We made a long journey of 16 hours up and down the mountain and met him in Guwahati in Assam, and we were able to give him a memorandum listing 1,528 victims, civilian victims of extrajudicial execution by the military and the security forces in Manipur, ranging from 1979 to 2012. And this became quite a big issue. Can we go to the next? And when Professor Christoph Heinz reported to the UN Human Rights Council, he said that this power that is given to the military under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is actually exceeding the power he said this is not applicable, this is, I mean, in the UN human rights framework, you can curb certain human rights or derogate from certain human rights when there is a state of emergency. But there are also certain non-derogable human rights which cannot be taken away under any circumstances, whether that's emergency, war, and right to life is one such right. And he basically wrote very clearly that Armed Forces Special Powers Act is in fact derogating from these non-derogable human rights and without even declaring that there is a state of emergency. These are very strong and powerful words. And we go to the next slide. And we went to the Supreme Court of India with the same list that we have given to the special rapporteur. And again, there in the Supreme Court, we were accused of being anti-national and trying to get strategic advantage by demoralizing the military in these very difficult circumstances. But after a lot of debate, the court finally said that something like every life in this country is important, including the life of those security forces, the military who are working in very difficult circumstances. However, when an allegation of this magnitude of extrajudicial killing of more than 1,000 civilians is made, and so long as there is a Supreme Court, and so long as there is a constitution, we cannot help but to side with the victim and look at the veracity of this case. So they said, we are going to constitute people of highest integrity in India, and they have chosen a former judge of the Supreme Court, and he was given 6 cases. He was assisted by a police officer, a top-level police officer, and also a person from Northeast region itself, a very well-respected retired bureaucrat. And he was asked to look at 6 randomly chosen cases out of this 1,528 and look at 2 issues. One, whether there was a genuine encounter as claimed by the security forces, or these are fake encounter, meaning they just fake or stage manage as if they are an encounter. Or the second question was, what is the antecedent of these people? Are they hardcore terrorists as claimed by the security forces, or are they just ordinary people doing ordinary work as claimed by the families? And we were able to give enough evidence which are cross-examined by the other side, and this committee, after perusing the entire evidence, came to the conclusion that in none of these 6 cases are genuine encounters, meaning that these are stage-managed encounters. And all the 7 victims, because there was in one incident there were 2 victims, they said none of them have any established criminal records. I mean, if you are a hardcore terrorist, then probably there would have been 10 cases against you. And this basically gives us a clean chit, literally, that what we are claiming of this 1,500 is, in fact, with quite a lot of substance. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So in 2016, again, after a lot of deliberation, after a lot of courtroom dramas where we are accused of all kinds of names for taking on the military, in 2016, the Supreme Court come out with a very good judgment, which is quite a landmark judgment, basically saying that irrespective of whether it is this disturbed area which are under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act or not, if a person is killed by the action of the police or the security, then the criminal law should also, there should be registration of case and there should be criminal investigation of these cases. And this was not very popular among the police and the military, but nevertheless, it has been written down by the Supreme Court in its judgment, and that is a big achievement. Can we go to the next? Yeah, and we were also asked to say that this 1,528 is too vague, give us more detail, and are the families really willing to pursue these cases? So we did a massive kind of a verification work, and we invited the families to come and sign a document that they are willing to go forward with this case. So we were able to get something like 900 families coming and signing up and signing an affidavit saying that we want to pursue our case, out of which, again, about 200 were not in our original 1,528. So, but nevertheless, we were able to document something like 655 cases which are quite verifiable, and the families were ready to move, and we presented this to the Supreme Court. And these are different categories. Some of them, there was some inquiry done by the lower court or by the National Human Rights Commission or by commission of inquiry set up by the provincial government. And can we go to the next slide? And finally, in 2017, the Supreme Court instructed the Central Bureau of Investigation, which is like the, but in between, before that, what was something very interesting was one of the key cop who is instrumental in killing many of these people, he have admitted of having performed the act of killing of more than 100 civilians or suspected militants, and he came out in public and confessed that yes, he did the killings. He's also a local person, but he said he have done it because he was forced to do this by the, he was given orders by the superiors to do this. And this was a huge revelation, this was in 2016, and in 2017, the Supreme Court, can we go to the next slide? The Supreme Court instituted this special investigation team of the Central Bureau of Investigation, and they basically said in all those cases where there was some kind of a verification by an authority and some compensation has been already given to the victims, you should register case against the security forces or the police and the militants or the military and start investigation. So can we go to the next slide? The point is, it is easier said than done. You know, when an investigating agency of the state is asked to investigate the wrongdoing of their own peer groups in some way, it's very, very difficult. They were trying to make all kinds of delays, not meeting the deadlines, filing the same charges. The charges were filed against the people who are already killed rather than the people who are perpetrating the killing. So this was more, they were trying to file cases for attempting to commit murder by the insurgent group against the security forces. But it took a long time for us to straighten that up, despite of the Supreme Court. But finally, can we go to the next slide? Sorry, it's getting to too much of detail. And when this delay was going on, and the investigating agency was playing games, we again took help from the UN Special Rapporteur. At that time, the Special Rapporteur have changed. Agnes have come. Professor Christoph Heinz have left the mandate. And they also came out with a very strong statement that it seems the way in which the investigation was going was, we are extremely concerned that the delay appears to be deliberate, undue, unreasonable, and we condemn this lack of progress. This was something that they came out in a press statement from the Special Rapporteur, and it really helped us to expedite the process again. Can we go to the next? Yeah, at present, we have about 39 first information report, which is the registration of the case. We have about 14 charge sheets. They have completed the investigation, and for the first time, 75 police officers are now facing trial. They are indicted, but still not a single military. And it's very interesting, there are joint operation between the police and the military. Sometimes the military is the one which is taking the lead, but there are charge sheet against the police, but not to the military. So that's again a problem that we are having. And they have filed 7 closure reports saying that we can't find sufficient evidence. So we are again taking this and challenging it in the form of a protest petition. And and in some of the protest petition saying that we are not happy with this investigation and there should be further investigation, we were able to succeed in 2 cases for the court to order that there should be further investigation. Can we go to the next? Yeah, I mean, the greatest impact is that after this, this process, we initiated this process in the Supreme Court. In 2009, in the height of this extrajudicial execution, Manipur is again a very small place for about 3.7 million people. We documented about 500 extrajudicial execution in a year. But after we start this process today, we can very comfortably state that this phenomena is gone, the killing have stopped, and we are able to have at least some breather. I mean, there are bigger political issues that needs to be resolved, but at least this killing have stopped. So from a cycle of violence, we are able to stop that cycle of violence and revert it, and some process of accountability was established. And yeah, I mean, but at the same time, you know, the people who were planning this kind of killings in the name of counterinsurgency are feeling the little jittery nowadays, even though they are still in position of power, and they are also making every effort to stop this process somehow. I mean, we were fortunate that the Supreme Court came to our side, at least up to 2018. Unfortunately, there was not a single hearing after 2018 September, because the judge who was pushing this, a very well-respected judge, Justice Lukur, he retired in December 2018, and till date, they have not reconstituted a new bench, so the Supreme Court have not heard it more than 1 year now. So these are few dilemmas that we are...
It's the Supreme Court of India or of Manipur?
It's the Supreme Court of India.
Of India.
Yeah. So this is where we are. I mean, it's one step forward, but also perhaps we might have to wait for the next steps to be taken. But we are really celebrating the fact that the killings have stopped at least, and there is some accountability process. But as we say, this is a long journey. We were able to scale one height, one peak, but there are many peaks to be covered. So I just wanted to share a happy story in an increasingly unhappy world, and in a way, also many international observers find that this is the ICJ, for example, the International Commission of Jurists have stated that this is perhaps in their project in South Asia and Southeast Asia, the only success in terms of getting accountability for impunity. So it's, I think, partly mobilizing the victims themselves to speak up on their own, partly the magnanimity or the courage of some judges sitting in the Supreme Court, partly it is a careful use of the international procedure and the pressure that we were able to move a little bit, not without a criticism. Sometimes many of our more radical friends laugh at us and saying that you expect justice from Indian Supreme Court, which has been doing this, but I mean, the idea is that we have to work as much as we can and see how we can leverage, whether it is the people's movement, the constitutional law and the Supreme Court, or the United Nations procedure. We use the system as much as we can to be able to push for justice. Let me stop at that. I know it's too much of detail and heavy for an evening. Yeah.
Gabi Lasky, as I said before, she was in the City Council of Tel Aviv, municipality, and she's in Meretz party, and she's a human rights lawyer. This one? Okay, Gabi Lasky will respond. She was in the member of the City Council of Tel Aviv municipality. She is up in, I hope she will be in the next parliament member, and she is a human rights lawyer.
I hope so too.
And we really appreciate, because she got sick, and in spite of that, she made the effort to come today.
Good evening. Thank you, Nava, for inviting me and for creating this important event of getting us together, and for letting me be here and listen to this amazing story of courage you know, and I really am honored to be sitting beside you, because as a human rights lawyer, I know how it takes and how we are alone in this field, although, you know, before the military, before the police, before the courts, and with a lot of, you said, you know, people still call you names, and I'm sure it's more than calling you names. I know, I'm sure that sometimes you're also, you and the people that work with you are in danger sometimes, and so it takes a lot of courage, and we applaud you, and we really appreciate everything that you've done. And actually, if we see the ending of what you say, that is a positive story, that you've been able to end the extrajudicial assassinations or executions, it is amazing, you know, and we really have to applaud you for this. And so I know that it's very difficult, but you have to really, you know that here we stand with you, and we applaud you. I want to tell a little things about, you know, the differences and the things that are the similarities and the differences between your system and what's happening in Mainpur and in Israel. In just a brief sentence, we also had, you know, our time with the British Mandate a little bit after you did, since 1917. And then our independence was at the same time, most of it in 48. But it's important because this is one of the differences between what's happening in India and what's happening here, that in 48 there was the partition decision from the UN, and in the state and in Palestine 2 states were created. So we have Israel and we have Palestine, and all the infringements of human rights in Israel have 2 different kinds of legality that oversee them. One is inside Israel, within the citizens of Israel. We had until 1966, we had a military rule over only the Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel were under military law. Okay, it was very ethnic, it was very specific from the beginning of the state until 1966. But still, after the military rule stopped in Israel, we really wanted to have another one, so we went and conquered the occupied territories, and now we have military law over the occupied territories. So we still have it, but it's different laws that are applicable inside Israel, and in the occupied territories, it's a different kind of law. And in Mainpur, it's everything, it's all the time talking about citizens of India. And I was very admired that you said that India is a democratic country, because Israel supposedly is also a democratic country. But since we have occupation, and since we're ruling over more than 3 million people, you cannot really say that Israel is a democracy. Even if we have so-called free elections, you know, it was supposed to be every 4 years, now we have it every few months, you know, but we can't really say that is a real democracy. And let's talk a little bit about our court. The Israeli court, the Supreme Court of Israel, is well known around the world for being a very activist court and trying to bring human rights into the everyday life of Israeli citizens. But the truth is, you talked a little bit about the public interest litigation. Okay, the Israeli court has public interest litigation. It means that someone that is not a part of the case can go to the Supreme Court and ask for justice. Like that's one of like we have like Aguda Lezchuyot HaEzrach or Adala, whatever. Even if they were not the ones that their rights were infringed, they can go to the Supreme Court. But we are going in an exactly opposite direction than in India. If in India you didn't have public interest litigation, and now you do. In Israel we had it, but now they're cutting it short.
I see.
They're now the judges themselves. It's not legislation. It's new rulings of the court. They are closing now the possibilities of NGOs to go to court in the name of people whose rights have been infringed. So they're really closing the possibility in that. They are presenting new manulim, laws for going to court. If it's a theoretical question, what is a theoretical question? People have already died in this extrajudicial executions.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's not a question. We have to see if it's going to happen again. And if we can't prove that it's going to happen again, then we can't come to court and litigate against it.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to close it, and they're trying to minimize the possibility of going to court. One of the similarities, actually, is that we have a decision from the Supreme Court against extrajudicial executions. Actually, Michael Sfard was one of the litigators in that case. But even though we have a ruling like that, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It just happens a little bit different. Okay, it's not planned in that way, and it happens. The way that we have changed it is that, for example, is through lack of accountability and impunity. Mm-hmm. So in Israel, there's a lot of human rights organizations, and one of the amazing things that you do is that actually you're like a huge supermarket of organizations in one same organizations. But in Israel, it is divided through different organizations, like B'Tselem, Yesh Din, Breaking the Silence, Committee Against Torture, and all organizations which are very important to human rights in Israel and in the occupied territories. They take different cases. And some of the organizations for many years have been documenting and presenting complaints of human rights infringements in the occupied territories. The first one was B'Tselem. But now, after so many years that B'Tselem has been presenting these documentations and complaints to the military prosecutor and to Israel's general attorney, since there is impunity and almost no one has been indicted, they stopped complaining. So we're in a reverse process than what's happening with you. Organizations understand that in Israel, there's not going to be justice for this complaint. Okay, there are some indictments. I cannot tell you. One of the most well-known is Elor Azaria. Okay, well, there is a video of a volunteer of B'Tselem who took a video of a soldier that actually pointed his gun and murdered a Palestinian that was already handcuffed in the ground and didn't present any danger to anyone. Okay, so he was indicted. There was there was no way that the military could say that really nothing happened. But this man went out from prison after 7 months. I represented a 16-year-old Palestinian girl called Aya Tamimi, and she was indicted for slapping a soldier, okay, that came to her house with full armor and guns, and she was in her house, and she, with bare hands, she pushed him away and slapped him, and she got 8 months in prison, okay? So when we say that there have been some indictments for the military, then we can see that sometimes, it's not real justice. It's sometimes it's just a way of of impunity. Then, besides the military and the police, we also have the settlers that live in illegal outposts, in illegal settlements in the West Bank, and they want to get access to the Palestinian land, and they want to build more settlements in that Palestinian land, and so they use force against Palestinians living there. There is no question that they are military, that these Palestinians are military or terrorists. They're just civilians that are working their land, that they're taking their sheep and things like that, and they brutally assault them. And there is so much impunity that these people are never, almost even not indicted. They're almost never arrested. And not only that they're not arrested, some of them, even the state agrees that they are living in illegal outposts. We know that according to international law, all settlements are illegal. But even the state agrees that some of them are illegal outposts. But they're there. The state knows how to demolish Palestinian homes. Okay, there was a huge demolition besides Jerusalem because of security reasons. But they don't demolish the houses and the villages of these settlers that are in this illegal outpost. Now, another difference is that whereas the Palestinian Israeli citizens, as Israeli Jewish citizens, will be brought to court, to a civilian court, in the occupied territories, the Palestinians are brought to military courts. So it's, so you can understand how difficult it is there to bring justice. You have a judge that's a military judge. The prosecution is also military. Even when imagine this, that when the prosecution comes into the courtroom, he salutes the judge. So it means that from the beginning there is
hierarchy.
That there's hierarchy between the prosecution and the judge. How you cannot really get real justice there, since mostly we're talking about the law of occupation. Now, you talked also about international human rights law and that the Indian Supreme Court has been using it in their cases. Well, in Israel, they don't know about it. It doesn't exist. In Israel, and especially in the military courts, you can bring arguments from international court and from human rights law, and they will never make a ruling based on that. So although there are this international legislation, and there's international agreements and conventions that help to guarantee human rights, in Israel, especially in the military courts, they are not used. So we haven't been able to get decisions from this court regarding this kind of law and intervention. I had a case of a minor. I represent a lot of minors in the military courts, and again, there's no question that these minors are not terrorists and they're not participating in warfare, and we have 12, 13, 14-year-olds, that are kept in detention for long periods of time. And in one of these cases, I got a video that this child's testimony was in violation of the Convention Against Torture. And I had an affidavit from the rapporteur on torture, and he wanted to come to the military court to testify and to say that the way this testimony was extracted from this kid is illegal and it amounts to torture. and the court decided that it wasn't relevant, and they didn't allow me to bring him as a witness to the case.
Right.
So, although in narrative, Israel likes to speak about being a democracy and the Supreme Court translates the decisions into English in order to pass them on to show the world what a light to the nations we are regarding human rights. The problematic regarding human rights is not only that we have shrinking democratic spaces, there's a lot of legislation mostly against Palestinian Israeli citizens. Today we don't have a constitution as you have in India, and we have some basic laws. But now, like a year ago, there was constituted a new basic law called the Wahat al Salam, the basic law of nationality, which the national state law, which actually in a basic law, in a constitution, says that there are two different kinds of citizens, that there is no equality between Jews and non-Jews in Israel. So instead of going forward in presenting more freedoms, in being able to say that we are defending human rights in legislation and in courts, we're going backwards. And so that's one of the biggest problems in Israel that we have today regarding inside Israel and what's going on in the occupied territories. And just one last thing that I want to say, you talked about your colleague that she was in hunger strike, and it's she's probably a very impressive woman. And in Israel Palestine, we have still administrative detention every month. Today, if I have my numbers correctly from B'Tselem, there's around 400 people in the administrative detention that they don't know why they are being incarcerated. And they prolong their detention for several months at a time. And there have been some points that some of the administrative detainees go on hunger strike, because this is such an infringement of your rights, to be taking your freedom, and they don't even tell you why, and you cannot, and there's almost nothing that you can do in order to stop them. So this is like, this is the way to say, I am a free person. I decide what's going to happen with my person, with my body. So they have gone on hunger strikes, and here what they do in Israel is they force feed them. Yeah. It's not their decision. Actually, they don't agree on that, differently from your colleague, but they forcefully feed them in order not to create, some kind of. Israel is very worried that the Palestinians don't have martyrs, or they don't have things like that. So actually they do that. I don't know if we have anyone now going through a hunger strike. And one last thing that I wanted to tell you is that we share the same regard from the public and the authorities. Okay, we're also called names. We are even called traitors. And actually, as we believe that by upholding human rights of everyone, we are doing the right thing, not for ourselves, but for the state of Israel and for all its citizens. So in that, I really want to tell you how honored I am to be here with you and to applaud all the wonderful things that we do, and that maybe next time that we meet, we can meet and say, that remember those days, that we had to go to court in order to defend basic human rights. So I hope this day comes very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We will open to questions, but before that, I want to tell both of you, I think there are two issues that maybe we can learn from Manipur experience. One is to use more the international community to put pressure, like the international court in Den Haag, or international community, not to give up this struggle, because I think it has different powers than what we have here inside Israel. And the other one is the community. I don't know if there are cases, maybe I'm wrong, but that a large group of people are appealing together about the case of killing, or is it a case by case by case, or there are, like in your case, 1,000 people came together. This is something with power. So I don't know, two ideas that came to my mind, maybe we can adopt here.
Regarding that last idea, there's a Supreme Court decision regarding torture, and we got to that decision through presenting individual cases, one after another, and we have to say, that Leat Semel, Advocate Leat Semel, Avigdor Feldman, the Committee Against Torture, they're the ones that presented a very big bulk of cases. And only after a lot of cases were together, the Supreme Court by itself, brought all these cases together and got to the decision against torture. Don't think that we have this magnanimous decision against torture. There is in the end, after a beautiful Supreme Court decision, that you cannot use torture, in the end there is a derogation that, in these cases you can use torture. It's not, but it was like that. But it's true, we have to think about it.
Stanley, what's his name? That did that against torture.
What's his name? Yeah, Kretschmer and others.
Yeah. Okay, so let's share, ask, do.
Just to remember them.
بالعربي?
Okay, can I put it?
Do you want more devices?
You know.
Yes.
כן, נראה לי.
Let's use
אני
machines.
לא צריכה, אבל אני צריכה. מה אני עושה?
Wait, until...
בסדר, קיבלתי, תודה.
תביא. اوكي.
اوكي، شكرا كثير على المحاضرة القيمة وعلى التجربة الإيجابية اللي شاركنا فيها. وكمان بالنسبة للي حكته جابها أنا بتفق معها بكل كلمة حكتها للأسف الشديد. وبدي أحكي مداخلة بالنسبة للمحكمة العليا تحديداً. أول إشي محكمة العليا أو محكمة العدل العليا عندنا ما بتاخذ بعين الاعتبار حتى محكمة العدل العليا بما يتعلق بالقانون الدولي الإنساني أو بقوانين الدولية بما يتعلق في القدس الشرقية تحديداً. القدس الشرقية حسب القوانين الدولية هي أراضي محتلة، ولكن محكمة العدل العليا الإسرائيلية لا تتعامل مع القدس الشرقية كأراضي محتلة وترفض أن تتعامل معها كأراضي محتلة، وفي كل قراراتها تعتبرها أراضي خاضعة لسيادة إسرائيل.
Mohammed, introduce yourself. Say what you do.
No.
أنا اسمي محمد أبو سنيني، أنا محامي عامل في مجال. سماعتك مش نافعين.
רגע.
בסדר, את זה אני מבינה.
אוקיי.
זה לא עובד בכלל?
זה מאוד חלש. בסדר.
وفي كمان بالنسبة كمان لمحكمة العدل العليا الإسرائيلية بدي أحكي إنه اليوم للأسف الشديد محكمة العدل العليا الإسرائيلية من سيء إلى أسوأ، وعم تتأثر أكثر في السياسة العنصرية اللي تتبناها حكومة إسرائيل بشكل أو بآخر. وخير مثال على ذلك في موضوع ما يتعلق باحتجاز جثامين الشهداء من قبل قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلية من أجل التفاوض مع حركة حماس لتحرير جثامين الجنود الموجودين لدى حركة حماس، واستخدام هذه الجثامين كأوراق ضغط وتفاوض مع حركة حماس. محكمة العدل العليا الإسرائيلية رفضت هذا القرار من قبل الجيش وقالت إنه لا يجوز خرق قانون أساسي أو حق أساسي للإنسان إلا بقانون واضح وصريح، ولا يكفي أن تعتمد على قوانين الانتداب البريطاني التي تسمح بالقيام بحجز جثمان لغايات التفتيش والتحقيق. ولكن للأسف الشديد قامت دولة الاحتلال بتقديم ما يعرف بإعادة محاكمة أمام محكمة العدل العليا أمام هيئة موسعة من 7 قضاة، وال7 قضاة كان قرار الأغلبية بأنه يجوز حجز جثمان ميت في الثلاجة من أجل التفاوض مع حماس في غزة. وهذا أيضا بفرج إنه كيف إنه محكمة العدل العليا الإسرائيلية خضعت ورضخت لضغوطات الحكومة الإسرائيلية العنصرية. وبالتالي للأسف الشديد صعب جدا الوضع القضائي أن حتى في أعلى جهاز قضائي الذي يفتخر دوما بأنه يحقق العدالة، للأسف الشديد هذه المحكمة أيضا تخضع للإملاءات السياسية والأمنية الإسرائيلية. شكرا.
Thank you. I have a question and a proposal. I have a question and maybe with modesty, a suggestion for Nava and all of you to consider, and maybe many of others could support this relating to what you mentioned now, Nava. First of all, my question is, in your country, is this situation like we suffer from the fact that hundreds of young kids that are arrested, they cannot be visited by a probationary officer or by a social worker in the critical time when they are in trauma. And actually Israel is even signed on the convention to the UN that we have to oblige to this, but it's completely ignored. So what's your situation? And the other idea that I thought, following Nava's inspiration, I think what could raise the conscientiousness in the world is the suffering. We have to focus on the small things sometimes, because to imagine someone being shot until you see, like last week, a 9-year-old child was shot in the eye. So, okay, so everything is like, oh, we didn't have this before, or we didn't have before another type of tragedy. So I think there is something, and that's a question, what's your situation? And it's ignored completely here. There was a state here that all the young arrested Palestinians, for example, that they were in prison, they had the possibility to study also throughout the Open University and all kind of things. And this was actually stopped by Bibi himself, by our Prime Minister. And I think somehow this falls between the chairs. And I think for me this is a proof that when a state doesn't want peace, because we know that a lot of the peace activists that came out on the Palestinian side and so on, They are the ones that studied in the prison and they transformed their violence and started to go on the Gandhi and the Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King Day. So what I suggest is, if your situation is the same, I think we should go to the international bodies about this positive demand. It's very difficult to say that you are a traitor also, but it's a positive act that I'm sure the public opinion will go for it, but what do you think about it? Thank you. And thank you, I want to say that I really appreciate so much what you did, and I know what is done here also by you, so it's a very important issue. I'm the colleague of Dr. Mohammed Diab. My name is Barak Shaleh from the Organization of Social Workers for Peace, and we are connected and do a lot of things together.
Actually, there was a project that עושים שלום and Psychoactive did really going and being witness in the courts and writing reports.
For my kids.
So you know them. And many of them were graduates of our mental health professional courses.
Questions or answers?
Questions, answers, dilemmas, whatever you want. Come here.
Me?
Yeah?
No, I'll sit here.
So you need a mic?
Thank you, first of all, both of you. It was very interesting. I feel like this has been said before by some of you, but I feel like the most interesting for me from your talk about what happened, what's happening in Manipur, is the involvement of UN organism. In Israel, we don't have that a lot. We don't see them as part of our legal system, as I feel like you take them more seriously. And I guess it's just interesting for me, how did you get to that stage that the courts take the UN and its rapporteurs and whatever seriously?
First, it was an amazing description of what you guys are doing, and what caught me is the fact that, I think that there are more similarities than differences, and this interaction between the three entities, the ordinary people, the army and the police, and the Supreme Court. This triangle is everywhere, and this interaction between these parts are very crucial and very important. So the question that I want to ask you is, are the police people and the army people in Manipur locals, or there are people that are coming from other parts of India, similar to the soldiers in the occupied territories, right? And the other thing is this issue of the, do you have any representative of Manipur in the Supreme Court? And this issue of the Supreme Court also in Israel, as you mentioned, becomes very, very problematic, because, I mean, the government has more and more influence in determining who will be the judges, and like in the US, in Israel, in other countries, I mean, we are not guaranteed that forever the Supreme Court will be able to defend us against this army and police.
Okay. Please answer.
You want to start with the point, or should I? I mean,
You have the most
Sure.
questions, so-
Okay, let me do that.
They
Okay.
come to you.
Well, let me start with the last question and go up. That's better. Well, independence of judiciary. Well, I am trying to be an optimist, and which is getting increasingly difficult. Many of my colleagues laugh at me when we go to the Supreme Court initially, actually. What do you expect? I mean, this government who has been killing us for the last 70 years, you think you're going to get justice from them? I mean, what is the other option? Constantly hang? I mean, India is not a state that's going to wither away so soon. Revolution is not going to happen so soon. I think it is important for us to plead also on the humanity on the other side, which is extremely important. There are good people on the other side. I think that is some kind of a recognition of it, and how much we can push things is critical. And therefore, again, as I was telling you, there was one good judge who was pushing this. He retired in December 2018. 2019, 2020, we have repeated in the Supreme Court, Chief Justice, 3 times that our case has not been heard. The Supreme Court Chief Justice have said, yes, it will be reconstituted. I mean, it's like now we are, 2020, already February is over, so September, I mean, it's more than, I mean, almost a year and a half that it has not even been constituted. We are not a blind optimist, but we continue to hope that things will change there. Sometimes it's tiring, but we continue to push that. Local people involved in this, military are 99% from outside. The police are local. But what is very interesting was, especially after Irom Sharmila have started this hunger strike, slowly, I mean, again, Manipur, I'm sure for most of you, you are hearing it for the first time. The world doesn't know. To UN, you have to first go with a map. When we first went to the UN to be able to say where Manipur is. I mean, it's not like Palestine or Israel, where the whole is the focus of the world. So we are taking baby steps, honestly, but we are trying to build on whatever is possible. What was interesting was after Sharmila have started, when APSPA became known to the Human Rights Committee, India is also very concerned about its image internationally. It wants to be one of the permanent members of the Security Council. And they have to play this leverage, and they have to prove to the world that we are different from China. I mean, that's the big issue, right? So they have to play the democracy card. So we are not opposing the democracy card. We are saying, yes, very good, you are a democracy. But however, if you are a democracy, there are a few things that you have to do in your own backyard. I mean, in the 40s, India was the champion against racism, champion and decolonization. We said, yes, very good. Now you walk the talk, you do the things that you preach outside here. I mean, so we have to leverage the bright side of the state and the thing. I mean, otherwise, what do? You keep on demonizing, you get angry and angry. Things doesn't change that way. I mean, it may work sometimes, it may not work, sometimes it requires a lot of patience. But however, our point is after these things are exposed, after 2004, they changed the counterinsurgency operation. The military is still the iron or the steel frame, and they have recruited they have constituted what they call the Manipur Police Commando, which is doing only counterinsurgency work. They are isolated from the population. And this guy, this person that we have confessed it, was someone who was recruited in 2003. And they create this killing machine within the Manipuri who are isolated. Some of them sometimes are victims of militant torturing their family or extorting money from their family. So they use it and they basically create a killing machine. Now, when the accountability process starts, they're realizing the mistake that they have made, and now they are confessing what they have done at the risk of their own life and limbs. So it's an interesting process that's going on. Again, there are no clear answers to this, but we often quote Paulo Freire in the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Sometimes the worst oppressors are not the oppressors themselves, but people from the oppressed class who want to identify themselves with the oppressors. Sometimes they become the worst because for them they have to constantly prove their loyalty to the system, and sometimes they can be worst. So it is not about just ethnicity or nationality, but sometimes it's the structure of power that operates, and that's a reality that we have to grapple with. In terms of media, again, the Indian media is perhaps at its lowest at this point in time, so let's not talk about it here. Sometimes it's problematic, sometimes it's an asset. So you have to know when to use make the best use of it. In fact, we would not have gone to the Supreme Court had it not been for the media. And they actually tried to play a game on us. When we submitted this memorandum to the UN Special Rapporteur in Guwahati, there was also media present. And after a few weeks, the Telegraph from Calcutta, which is the one that covers East India. India is again huge, billions of people, so what is relevant in Delhi might not be so relevant in Calcutta. And Calcutta basically caters the eastern part of India. Telegraph wrote an article saying how concerned the Home Ministry was about our memorandum to the Special Rapporteur. And because of that, they also said the Home Ministry has black marked 3 people, 2 Dutch and 1 British, who had made some solidarity visit to us, and their visa to India will never be given all their lifetime, because they think that this memorandum, there must be a foreign hand. You know, there's always a foreign hand conspiracy theory. Honestly, they have absolutely nothing to do this. We spent, the midnight oil to draft this and document all these cases. They have nothing to do. But that's why we got so angry again that we published this and we went to the Supreme Court saying that, verify, we are not telling lies, we are telling the truth, the families are there, the victims are there. If you want to cross-check, please cross-check. So that's why we put it in the Supreme Court. So media, it is again a game that you have to play. Huh? I mean, so sometimes negative media, we try to leverage it to create something new. So there are things that you cannot change, but we try to make some strategic moves so that things move. Again, and you say, I mean, this history of Manipur, I bet 99.9% of Indians do not know. This is not part of our syllabus. The school textbooks in Japan talks about Manipur, or at least Imphal, because for the Japanese in the Second World War, they call this the flower in the lofty heights. They were almost having it, and they fell, and they couldn't have it. So in Japanese textbooks, Imphal is studied as an example of just because you are powerful, you cannot do everything. But if you ask a normal, ordinary Indian in the big cities, where is Imphal? They would confuse whether it is in Nepal or in Burma or in China. We ourselves have to prove constantly, So that's a big tragedy of a huge country, so diverged, but the narrative, the national narrative is created by a very small, one particular identity, and other identities are not able to identify it fully. Again, let's not go into that. It's a long story. Convention against torture, again, unfortunately, India have not signed India had signed the Convention against Torture in 1997, but they have forgotten to ratify the convention. So we have not ratified the convention yet. In the last UPR, 42 countries have recommended the government of India to ratify it, but India has not ratified it. So it is not yet a member of the Convention Against Torture. So we are also doing some advocacy work on that. India is definitely not the best example of following international law, but whatever is available for us to leverage it, we try to use it because that's something that is available to us. Yeah, maybe I leave the rest to for you to respond. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that. So it's difficult to hear, more than 1,000, extrajudicial killings is a number that is difficult to cope with, Here we have to cope with other things, but it's, like a 9-year-old boy, not being shot in the eye, but in his head, So it's very difficult. Regarding your question about why the military courts do not use human rights law or any international apparatus or conventions, I don't know. They just don't. And in a lot of cases, I present them with arguments, with conventions, with infringements of human rights, and they don't even, in their decisions, they don't even reply regarding those arguments that I presented. It's just like I didn't say it, And I keep on doing it for the sake of history, because one day someone will tell them, we argued that before you and you didn't take it into consideration. But they don't say one word regarding it. They don't say it applies, it doesn't apply. In another case it would apply. Nothing. Like, it was never put on the table. It's amazing. It's all the judges, as if there isn't like an official decision. We're not going to reply to any arguments regarding international law. Unbelievable, but it's not happening. Going to the Supreme Court, and the problematic that we have regarding who puts the judges in its place. In Israel now, we have like a big fiasco of who is now, so much rubbish coming out of how judges were elected. Although we still believe that we have a very good election process of judges, it's, this one had sex with this one, the other one had, it's really, really terrifying. But regarding the Supreme Court, I have to tell you that when I go to the Supreme Court, I don't always go, because although I'm a very optimistic, I also know the decisions of the Supreme Court. So, as being a human rights lawyer and like community lawyer, when we plead, when we go to court, we don't only go for that one case. We have to take into consideration how this decision will influence our whole community, the human rights community. So, of course, as a lawyer, our main focus is our client. But as human rights lawyer, we have another client, and that is community. That is the human rights people whose rights will be or have been infringed, and we have to take that into consideration. So I always make a balance. Okay, when should I go to court? And there is, if I know that the situation is bad, and if I go to court, either it will stay the same or it will get better, then I go to court. But if the situation is like this, and I know that there's a possibility that through the decision the situation will get worse, then I won't go. Not all, it's very difficult, but many times we just don't believe that the decision of the Supreme Court will be a decision that will make human rights stronger or safer or better. So those times we decide not to go to the Supreme Court. And one last thing that I wanted to tell you is that actually in Israel there is an interesting NGO that it's called Breaking the Silence. That is soldiers, that went to the occupied territories, but when they come back, they actually document and they talk about the infringements of human rights that they and their peers committed while serving in the occupied territories. And that is actually something very, very interesting regarding that sphere of human rights organizations, that actually is like, that will be some kind of way of trying to stop it. But again, the same way, Nava, and I agree that we have to go out, like B'Tselem is going out, that we have to start talking outside of what's going on. There's now the International Criminal Court that they're checking into Israel, And it becomes a political issue. And human rights is not a political issue. Human rights is human rights. And the fact that what happens in Israel is that if we criticize Israel, or if any other country criticizes Israel, automatically they become anti-Semite. As if, as if not in our scriptures, it didn't say that the way a father, a parent, shows that he loves his son is because he criticizes him, because he tells him what he's doing wrong. And in that sense, I believe that what we do is because we love our country, because we want it to be fair, to be equal, to be holding up for human rights of everyone, for women, for Palestinians, for gays, so in that sense, we do have a problem now. If Jews criticize Israel, we're now called auto-anti-Semitic. That's also. But okay, so you can call us that, and we believe that we are human beings, and that our task in life is to fight for what others do, to our fellow human beings. So thank you very much. I learned a lot from your talk. It's, you put, now, we know we have to look into another area that we didn't know about, that rights are being infringed, and, and when we go through our inventory, I hope that you give us more good wins and faith that we can change the world. Thank you.
Thank you both. I'm very glad we invited Rami to take the video. So it will be in YouTube and everybody can see it, all human rights organizations, all lawyers of human rights, and all human beings, because it's a joy to hear you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one more thing.